She is, really?
Did I not send the thank you?
They do that.
I'm ready. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the City Council Conference Meeting of Tuesday, November 26, 2024. I have two items on the agenda, and at the request of staff, item 2 will not be discussed tonight. Staff is still working on modifications to the boards and commissions, so we'll focus on item 1. You have the floor, sir.
All right, so thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Jacob Huckabee. I'm a budget analyst in the Finance Department for the city. So this evening, I'm going to be going over a brief update of what's been going on in the FYE 2025 Capital Improvement Program, and then starting some preparation for the FYE 2026 CIP as well. So some important dates as we go through the 2026 CIP process. We have today, and then on March 4th, we're going to be having a council session discussing all of the project requests that we received from both staff and council to give you all a chance to discuss those as they come in. And then on May 6th, we'll be reviewing the city manager's proposed preliminary CIP budget for any last minute additions or changes that you all like to make before the budget adoption in June. So to get us started, what is a capital project? These are going to be projects that are usually maintaining, replacing, or expanding on tangible assets that usually have a lifespan of more than 5 years. These projects are going to be on bridges, roads, buildings, anything like that. And the projects themselves are usually going to be more than one fiscal year to complete. And so as you appropriate funds in 1 year, those funds are going to roll forward, and you won't need to re-request those funds each year unless there's any new additional funding needed to complete that project. So as to where these projects come from and how they're funded, the majority of the projects are going to be identified in like the various master plans that we have. So the Parks Master Plan, the Water Master Plans, the Infrastructure Plans, those are all going to create ideas for these projects to come from. And when it comes to funding these projects, there's going to be a few sources when it comes to dedicated sales tax revenues, like the capital sales tax, the Norman Forward sales tax, the public safety sales tax, enterprise funds, grants, room tax. So there's quite a few ways that these can be funded. And when it comes to the priorities each year that we set, those are all set by council, and capital projects are all approved each year by council. And those can also be amended throughout the year if any higher priorities or new projects emerge as we go through the year as well.
What part of the room tax do we get?
It's parks.
Yeah, the parks portion can be used for capital projects.
Okay.
Restroom improvements in parks, etc.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So when it comes to where all these funds are accounted for, you have the list here. I won't go through each individual one, but just want to point out the largest one that's going to be in the CIP book that takes up the most space is going to be the capital fund. It's kind of composed of two portions. It's going to be the pay-as-you-go sales tax funded portion, which is the capital sales tax, and also all of the major general obligation bond programs. Those are all accounted for in the capital fund as well. And then we also have the enterprise funds that are included. We won't talk about those today. I believe they have their own session at some point in May, but those are also in the CIP book as well. So what is the Capital Improvements Fund? It was established in 1976 to account for capital projects funded by the capital sales tax, and it also accounts for the general obligation bond issues as well. This capital sales tax is a 0.7% sales tax that was approved by that same referendum in 1976 as well. And the main purpose of this was just to account for projects that didn't have their own dedicated revenue source like the enterprise funds do. So when it comes to how we allocate the sales tax each year, these are the guidelines that we use as kind of a starting point each year. These were set by some previous councils. These are not set in stone, and the past few years they've actually been changing. So for example, in FYE 24, the contingency and the maintenance of existing facility portions were swapped to allow the facility maintenance portion to cover an increase in square footage with the YFAC, the Adult Wellness and Education Center, and the Emergency Communications and Operations Center. And then last year, you all decided to appropriate a 5% portion for IT infrastructure to help fund some major IT infrastructure projects that are going to be popping up in the near future. And so again, these are a good place to start, but they're not set in stone.
Yes, sir.
How much of the other projects in debt service is just debt service of that 36%?
I'm not sure.
Not very
if it's
much.
that. Pretty
The
small.
only of the capital sales tax that is actually used to repay debt services is for the a portion of the ECOC that we supplemented from the capital sales tax.
So most of that would be actual projects,
Yeah.
not paying debt. Okay.
Yeah, like buildings and grounds, sidewalks, all those are included. So this slide is just kind of showing how those adopted budgets turn out compared to the guidelines. As you can see, there's not too much difference between these and the guidelines themselves. You can see in FYE 25, that's when the IT portion was added. And the only real differences compared to those guidelines are going to be a little bit less in street maintenance, which is made up for in the other projects portion. But overall, it's pretty consistent with where those guidelines kind of guide us to go. So as for the status of the capital fund, this is going to be kind of the most important thing to keep in mind for the FYE 26 capital process. For FYE 26, we have an estimated available for new projects at negative $7.6 million. This is something that for the past few years it has been negative, but not quite this much. We've tried to do, when we add new projects, find that money from somewhere else. That has really not been a concern up until this year. It's really getting to where it's starting to become a concern. And so as we go through this process this year, we're just going to kind of really look into finding other sources to fund any new projects that we have so that this doesn't become an increasing problem.
So council's kind of control rod into the reaction of capital spending is the pace at which our capital projects actually get delivered. The ability to just slow down the delivery and be able to accomplish fewer capital projects in a year to make sure we're not actually bouncing checks by the time we get to the year end. You look at a negative $7 million number, we get to control how fast the projects go once you approve them. And our only constraint is just making sure they all cash flow.
And I want to make sure that you're clear on, when we say cash flow in the capital fund right now, a lot of the fund balance that you're appropriating is actually reserved general obligation bond funds that can only be used for the projects that the voters approved. It's taking a little bit longer to spend down that money, but you really need to be careful and you really need to stop appropriating capital fund balance as if it were available for pay-as-you-go projects, because it really is not. If you're going to try to add any projects in this coming fiscal year, you really got to take something away. And when you think about, if I want to add a sidewalk project, okay, what am I going to give up? What am I going to suggest to give up? And you really got to try to think about, if I'm going to add $1, let's take away $2. And we just really, we've been saying this for years, but it's exacerbating itself.
Now, and we will be very, very, very busy on the capital project side in terms of the engineering work and then the contracting work because of a bridge bond that first time in history, council said we got to go solve that problem. The voters agreed and approved a $50 million bridge bond program. So when we're not as busy out of the capital sales tax side, we're going to be very busy on the GO bond side.
I was gonna say, in finance, we talked about TIF district master plan, and if, we saw something in maybe 5 years, 10 years that we could allot TIF money for as a project. I heard sidewalks and I immediately thought like walkability and project areas for, East Downtown and Griffin. And then I heard you when you said 1 to 5 million is what we should think of TIFs. But I also remember that Center City, I think, is in the neighborhood of 44 million. So
Yes, over
I
the life of the TIF, yeah.
I think if we're strategic in the future, looking at where we put these TIF districts and what projects are coming online to capture early, I don't think it's entirely dire for capital improvement.
No, I certainly agree, and, in that discussion when we were talking about a TIF master plan, remember that the TIF fund will be separate from the capital fund. We have a Center City TIF fund, we have a University North Park TIF fund that is separate from the Fund 50 capital sales tax and GO bond fund.
So we could kind of give that, the capital improvement,
Yeah, the capital
we could
improvement
give it a
picture
break and
is bigger
use
than
other.
just the capital fund.
Correct.
Yeah, so being geographically aware, I've got an alley project, we got a sidewalk need. Is it in Center City TIF? Then that.
Or any of the other districts we envision.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so, projected negative this year, next year, but then a projected positive balance in that third year. Are these, is there any specific project that contributes to that $7 million number? Are they all voter-approved projects like EOC and Constitution?
No, these pay-as-you-go projects are not voter-approved projects.
So what specific projects are we talking about that?
These are,
Added
and
up
you'll
to
see
that
a
much.
list later on that shows you the recurring projects that we do for street maintenance, for sidewalks and those things. But these are just the pay-as-you-go projects. And the fund balance that you see in Fund 50 in the capital fund is separated out. There's a reserve for GO bonds, there's a reserve for encumbrances, okay, but down there at the bottom, there's this available for new projects. And that's what, on an ongoing basis, this fiscal year, you would want to have some money to add some projects. And what this is telling you is that in this coming year, and really in this current year, you don't have any.
So it's a bunch of different projects. So I did read through here and was, a sidewalk here and there doesn't add up to $7.5 million. I think I had $200,000 in sidewalk projects in Ward 7 in last year's budget. And I don't know if anybody else even requested any that year, so I think Councilwoman Foreman did. So I was just kind of wondering what caused it to be that high of a number, and then what brings it down to 1.7 negative next year, and then what brings it up to a positive by that much in the following year.
And we started to program in those recurring projects based on those guidelines that you've seen. In the out years, we haven't programmed in those projects yet. So if you continue with the recurring projects that you're gonna see in this list in the out years, then that will draw that down further.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So looking back at the FYE 25 budget, here's a list of just some of the significant projects that have been completed to talk about some of the work that has been done. We have the 12th Avenue Northeast and High Meadows project, that's right offside the Griffin Soccer Complex, the Constitution Street Multimodal Path, James Garner Phase 2 from Acres to Flood, some Norman Ford project connecting downtown to Flood Street with the new big roundabout, the municipal complex renovations, we had the municipal court portion and the HR building completed. The Emergency Communications and Operations Center is funded through the PSST fund and some ARPA funds as well. The Lake Thunderbird TMDL data analysis and plan update the first 5 years. The vehicle wash facility at the North Base. New bus stops that are part of the long-range transportation plan. And then the final 3 are all Norman Ford projects as well. It's the Young Family Athletic Center, the Adult Wellness and Education Center, and the Griffin Community Park as well.
Do those numbers reflect the city's contribution to those projects, like the constitutional multimodal path? Did we got outside funding for most or half of that project? So is that what we had to spend, 1.145?
I believe so.
That's total cost.
The total, okay.
So that would reflect that the funding that we got from grant funding or whatnot too. So that's not entirely out of our pocket, I guess you could say.
Correct. Yeah.
And I know not all of these are voter approved, but several of them are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And here we have a list of some of the projects that are currently underway this fiscal year too. We have the TMDL Compliance and Monitoring Plan, which is in year 9. The next two are the Lower Imhoff Channel Stabilization Phases 1 and 2. It's partially funded through the capital sales tax. The ARPA funds are included in that as well, and I believe some grant funding too. We have the FYE 25 sidewalk projects, those recurring projects. In total, that was $500,000, includes sidewalks along schools, arterials, and some ADA sidewalk projects as well. We have the Gray Street two-way conversion project for $5.4 million. That's one of the voter-approved 2019 GO bond projects. James Garner Phase 3 in that same program from Duffy to Acres, which is $6.7 million. The Flood Multimodal Path Project. We have the first of the bridge maintenance bond program projects under construction, which is the 60th Avenue Northeast Bridge. The ECOC's vehicle storage facility is currently under construction. We have the stormwater park development on the Alameda and Carter intersection. Reed's Park, we have new restroom building and a new sports field maintenance building that comes out of the Park Development Fund, I believe. The Boyd Street stormwater pipe replacement and the Jenkins Avenue widening project from Inhofe to Lindsay. That's $15.5 million, again from the 2019 Transportation Bond Program. So this is just kind of a big look at the 2021 Street Maintenance Bond Program and where we're at with that. This is a 5-year, $27 million program. The first 3 years are all complete with year 4 underway. On year 4, the preventative maintenance is already complete. And then looking ahead into FYE 26, that will be the final year of this 5-year program. And so again, that was a 5-year, $27 million program. Next, we have the 2019 Transportation Bond Program we mentioned earlier in a few projects. On this list, the first 2 are complete, both related to Porter Avenue. We have the Acres intersection project, and then the streetscape coming out from that intersection. And then underway, we currently have the Gray Street two-way conversion. All those blue locks indicate what projects have received federal funding. Anything that doesn't have a blue lock next to it, any ACOG funds or grants will be pursued to add to those projects as well to help those future projects remain funded as well. This is an overview of the Bridge Maintenance Bond Program that was approved by voters in October of 2023. This is a 10-year, $50 million program, replacing or rehabilitating 18 bridges. As you can see, quite a few of these are already in design, with the Lindsay Street Rehabilitation Bridge already in bid preparation, and then the 60th Avenue Northeast Bridge, the replacement of that is already under construction. And again, like the 2019 program, any additional ACOG funds or grants that we can get for these bridges, we'll go ahead and pursue those. Recently, we got from the Shawnee Tribe a $13.8 million grant to go to the Porter Avenue project. Any of the funds that could go to these projects, those savings could potentially help add new bridges to this program as well. And so anything that we get with that can help accomplish that goal. This is just a quick look at the 2012 bond program. All these projects are completed except for the last one, which is the 36th Avenue Northwest road widening. From the city side, everything is ready to go. We're just waiting for federal funding to come in to help get that project fully funded and under construction. But once those are received, we'll be able to start on this project and get it completed to finish out this program as well.
Just for the record, Scott, what year did you guys start applying for federal funding for that project?
2016.
So 8 years almost that staff has been trying to get it. And I mentioned before how several of us have gone to Washington, D.C. We've sat in Senator Inhofe and Senator Langford's office, now Senator Mullen and Tom Cole's office. We've all face-to-face tried to lobby them for dedicated funding for this project, and multiple Ward 8 council members have advocated for it going back as long as I've been on council. This was approved the year before I got on council, so it's and I've always thought that it being a parallel arterial road next to the interstate, and all the talk about congestion and capacity on the interstate, you would think improving this section line road would make a lot of sense in that regard as an alternative route, but just
It is the last project we've got, that's the last promise we made, the oldest promise we made that we haven't completed yet.
and it's so expensive that we can't just fund it ourselves. So,
If you remember, if you look back at that 2019 bond, remember that, look at what the federal money has been locked up for, what we were successful in getting money for. And it kind of illustrates the change in priority, okay? Instead of widening streets to get more cars from point A to part B, the priority has changed somewhat to multimodal transportation with wider sidewalks and streetscapes and that sort of thing. And that's why we've been successful in some of these areas and not successful in widening 36th Street. It's just a change in priority at the federal level that happened after we went to the voters for the 2019 bonds under the assumption that the rules would be as they had been in the past.
yeah, I do recall when I first got on council, like being told that if we wanted to do Gray Street two-way or the Porter Streetscape, those were probably going to be projects we would have to find the money for, or get locally bond funded entirely, because they probably wouldn't qualify for federal funding because they didn't expand traffic capacity. And so, but yeah, that flipped 6-7 years ago, and now the big widening projects, exactly like the ones on there, aren't getting it. And those happen to be the projects that cost the most to do. So it's a tough situation for us and cities all over.
So this slide is just a brief overview of the ARPA funding obligations and where all those funds are going. A few of these are related to the CIP. We have the Emergency Communications and Operations Center received $10.9 million of ARPA funds, helped get that facility fully hardened to withstand any kind of natural disaster, to keep it operational in those situations. As we talked about earlier, the Lower Imhoff Creek Stabilization Project received $2 million of ARPA funding, and then about $6.2 million going to affordable housing. I believe the majority of that's going to the Crimson Flats development off of Imhoff and Oakhurst. And the rest of that just makes up the $22.2 million of ARPA funds that the city received.
Yes, sir.
The affordable housing project, that was with ARPA home dollars, correct? Like dollars that we had.
No, it was both. There's some of both.
Some of both, okay. But those home dollars were primarily for projects like that? Yes. Okay.
But this 6 million is straight from our 22 million in ARPA funds. It's not home, it's separate
not
from home.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
How, will this be all the ARPA funds we have, like we're spending every dollar we got?
Yeah, you'll recall that when the American Recovery Plan Act first passed, some of the guidelines that the Treasury set down were that you had to obligate the funds by December 31st of 2024 and actually spend the funds by December 31st of 2026. And we were like, oh man, that's 3 years off, there's no way, Well, December 31st of 2024 is not that far off anymore. And we had been under the assumption that when council appropriated the money for an area or a specified project, that would meet the obligation. The obligation to be met, though, has to be under contract. So you're gonna have an agenda item next meeting that shifts some funds around, I believe to the Boyd Street project, another stormwater project, so that it will be meeting the guidelines for ARPA obligations. And then we'll get this money back to Imhoff in the future.
And so is it home ARPA funds that we're talking about for the contract for City Care? Like when they said 119,000, that's not this?
I think that is.
It
From the
is.
6.2.
Okay.
Home is separate.
What is the home going to?
I believe Lisa Craig would be able to tell you for sure, but I believe that was going for like rental assistance and things
Okay.
of that nature. And I think that those funds have all been expended. We received those, I believe, in 21 maybe.
So we'll have spent all of the home ARPA and programmed all of the other ARPA by the end of this year.
Obligated all of it.
Obligated, sorry.
We would take very seriously the necessity to give money back to the federal government. Not gonna happen on our watch. We're gonna make sure the rules are all satisfied and we get those dollars programmed and out the door.
And just out of curiosity, maybe this question is for Scott. How does the ARPA funding rules work for some of the projects that you'll be switching around? Like, is it addressing the multimodal thing that we're talking about? Are there other accessibility or whatever?
But with the ARPA funds that we're looking at moving around, if you recall back, in the spring, we had the damage on Boyd Street where we actually found a pipe that had collapsed and had some damage. So the road actually sank about 3 inches right very close to Lahoma. And so we went and we did that emergency repair. But what we found when we got in there was we had failing infrastructure for several hundred feet. And then we need to replace it all, or we're just gonna continue chasing this problem with the risk of what could happen to our roadway. So what we're doing is we're gonna be taking those funds for lower MHOF and moving them to that project so we can have them obligated. And we've got the bids in, the bids have come in favorable, we're in a good position. And so we'll move that money to that. And because that is staying within the stormwater, it's treating it the same, but we will be doing a mill and overlay through that section of the entire roadway to kind of get a good finished look, get it up to a current standard. And so it doesn't really go towards the other multimodal type of projects. In this case, we're literally just keeping it within that stormwater
Okay.
project. And then we have some funding already put into the Boyd Street that will move back over into MHOF. So we're just gonna kind of put the money in the right accounts is really all we're doing at this point to make sure that those federal funds are utilized completely.
So we'll say things like the money's fungible. The contractor at the other end, he doesn't care if he's getting paid out of ARPA or, stormwater money or capital money, they're satisfied.
But it is a qualifying use, of course.
Yeah,
the
that's what
stormwater
I was,
project.
Yeah.
thank you, the qualifying uses.
Both are
Yeah.
qualified uses. And I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our new Public Works Director. Scott,
Unless you didn't get the email.
unless you did. So feel free to grill Scott on these questions.
Yeah, he's earning his keep now, so.
Got that done?
Yeah, I sent an email to the everyone asterisk. And if that did not show up in your email addresses, I need to talk to Mr. Tim Powers about that. Because everyone you would think meant everyone.
Probably does, but you have to read them. Anyway, yes, sir.
So I do have a question about, and I don't know, Mayor, if you've heard anything at ACOG recently, or if you have, Scott or Daryl, about the shovel-ready projects criteria. And that was one of the things that changed a few years ago where Norman was very aggressive with that, having projects ready to go. And we would get favorable federal funding from ACOG. And if I recall, like 1 year we got, I don't know if it was almost all of it, but we got more than a majority of it. And then other cities started to catch on and thinking, okay, we need to get as prepared as Norman is. But then, if I recall, it's when Mayor Miller was still mayor, and I remember her and I going up to ACOG, and because they were talking about altering their criteria and shovel-ready not really mattering anymore, and cities could just submit any kind of pipe dream of a project and maybe get it funded. And that first year, I recall Oklahoma City got a whole bunch of projects funded that were like sidewalk projects, which is awesome, but it came at the expense of everybody else getting funded projects for like streets and stuff. And so I didn't know, I'd heard something about maybe that was maybe
So
Going back.
they used to be what we called readiness points. And for being at different stages in the process, you got readiness points and there was a multiplier on that. So you could actually see your score grow over time. And yes, Norman, we were very good at doing that. We were submitting projects and we're already so far along in that readiness points that really benefited us and we were really doing good with it. They did drop that in the 2019 changes where they came out, so it was no longer part of the scoring system. We have heard that they are looking at adding some component of that back, probably not to what they were in the past, but to where you would get something. There's actually some projects now that are being awarded and they're actually getting funding for engineering. So they're that far out that they're actually going and getting engineering and go through the whole process. They've also lengthened the time frame. We used to just go 1 year out locked, and then there were 2 years out that were kind of not really locked. In fact, we actually had 36 phase one in a non-locked year, and then they changed it the next year and it didn't score and we didn't get it back in. But what they've done now is we're actually, like this year, we're submitting for 2028 projects. So we're years out in advance. So it's giving you the opportunity, or the readiness is not, you used to have to try to expend those funds within a year. It was hard to do. Now it's far enough out that it's taken a lot of that pressure away. We would love to see that come back, because we definitely take advantage of that again.
In the 2019 bond, that slide, that just shows the first 10 years of projects. There's
Yes,
other
there's,
projects.
yeah,
that-
we have more
yeah.
projects on that. And unfortunately, those further out projects are, the road widening, the old
Yeah.
guaranteed money projects that now are not. So we're still continuing to look at other federal funding sources, including race grants, Safe Roads for All. So we continue to look at every opportunity out there. We're even working with our partners, the Absentee Shawnee Tribe. So we're beating all the bushes to find all funding sources available to be able to keep our projects online.
And as it relates to ACOG policy and how they determine who gets points for what, Ms. Stevenson, in her background, we had a long conversation with ACOG staff and asked them questions about possible usage of dollars ACOG has access to and may not have ever pursued in the past. The ACOG staff recognized what we were asking was fair game and legitimate, and indicated that, well, we hadn't gone after those dollars in the past. A lot of that money winds up at ODOT. And so we're gonna seek some policy changes at the ACOG level to try to bring some of those dollars back under, your local capital budgets, as opposed to getting washed out in a much larger ODOT budget. It's nickels in an ODOT budget. It's complete projects for a city budget. So we're gonna keep working on them to Norman's advantage, and we think that's what we should be doing, darn it, and our counterparts ought to be doing the same for their communities as well.
I'm so sorry, but since Lisa is here now, can Lisa answer your question, Councilmember Grant,
Home ARPA?
about?
How we obligated the home ARPA funds by the end of this year. I assume they've all been spent.
Under the affordable housing line?
No, home ARPA.
Home ARPA, we have till 2026 to obligate the funds and
Oh.
2030 to expend them.
Oh, okay,
And we're still looking for a site. So
okay.
That's the affordable housing project. I think it was 12 units.
12 units.
And we thought we had a site. We worked on the property owner for a long time unsuccessfully.
You said 2030 was when they had to be expended?
Yeah, it has to be spent by 2030.
Yes, sir.
So now we just have some of the upcoming challenges and potential impacts on the capital budget. The first two are gonna be the potential impacts from the Rock Creek Entertainment District and the OTA's Access Oklahoma Turnpike projects. We have the Central Library's mold remediation and repairs. As we talked about earlier, where those studies kind of can create some of those projects that end up as requests in the process. We have the public safety study and the area and infrastructure master plan updates and the projects that come from those. We also talked about the Center City TIF. That fund has been collecting revenue and has funds available to go towards projects now. They're also wrapping up the urban design and implementation plan in that fund as well to give some ideas for projects in that area. We have the Griffin and Sutton Parks and the Griffin Hospital Campus project with the sale of that property coming up, and then the way that that property is used. We have the failing stormwater infrastructure, as we talked about. We've had a few instances along Boyd Street and Finley Drive where we've had to go in and make some emergency repairs. And due to budget constraints, it's always just difficult to come up with the money to do these big stormwater projects. In Building B, the police department has taken over where the municipal court has moved out, and they're just looking at ways that they can better utilize that space for themselves. We have the status of the FEMA grant for the flood warning system, the phases 2 and 3 of the fleet facility renovation, with phase 1 is already funded and underway. The fleet fueling facility, the tanks in that facility need to be removed and replaced to keep it operational. And then with fleet vehicle replacement, I believe in 2015, there was a study that was telling us that we basically need to replace about 6 million a year in vehicles, and we usually average about 2 million a year. And so again, just due to budget constraints, it's always a challenge to try and get those vehicles replaced at the pace that we'd like to see it.
I want to take some time to make sure that everyone is clear on, because these are the big deals. And to make sure that there's no other big deals that we haven't mentioned or thought of here. I know Rick is here, the Rock Creek Entertainment District, the council did approve the TIF project plan and development agreement for that. It was challenged with the petition that was successful. That successful petition has been challenged legally. Don't really know the status of that at this point. You all know a lot more about the turnpike than I do. But just know that is an ongoing big issue. The library remediation project, every time I hear an update from Jason or someone about that, the price goes up. The time goes longer. And that is just an ongoing concern for our capital budget as a whole. We do want to get the library back open as quickly as we can. As the legal processes play out, do we want to upfront money to try to get it back open while the legal processes play out is the real question before council.
And Anthony, kind of on that note, when we're thinking about Central Library in its current condition, and, we know the building leaks, and every time it rains, we gotta go mop up and take some precautionary measures. The building maintenance budget appropriation for the current fiscal year is about $700,000 for a building that size with that kind of wear and tear. Obviously, we're spending that building maintenance in a different fashion, but it is from that building maintenance budget that council already appropriated that we're paying when Kevin's got to go up there and mop up or, remediate some mold while it's going through the legal process. That's why we haven't had to come knock on your door for an additional appropriation, and it's not coming out of that risk management fund that Anthony maintains when an emergency happens. It's just because we were able to just refocus the maintenance side of Central Library.
So did we already approve the contract to let the books move to a safer location, more climate controlled?
The library folks are in pursuit of the place they're trying to secure. We've made suggestions and recommendations. They'll come back to us with a proposal, and we'll get them out of there long before mitigation.
Will that also be out of that 700?
Yes. We'll see. I don't know what the current balance in that account is, but we'll keep you apprised of how much we have left, and we can bring that as a component of the agenda item to secure that warehouse space.
What are we spending every weather event to?
60 or 70,000.
Okay, that still leaves money for renting a location for books. And then my other question is, what is the strategy for, I guess, PAYGO fixing it, if there is one, or if that's out of reach with our current budget? And also I'd worry about starting something that we couldn't finish and making it worse somehow. So, and not knowing how long litigation takes.
It is a messy proposition to begin to intervene because, and Rick may have a better idea about what type of remedy the courts may order. And it could be write a big fat check from the other party, or it could be other party, you gotta go fix it and make them whole. And if we're in the middle of it and the judge orders some mitigation direction, I agree. it's risky. We could cause ourselves more harm than good. And, you know, there's a lot of architectural work that'll have to get re-evaluated. And it may be very challenging for us to hire a contractor who would want to get in the middle of that. So that's an uphill. If council says that's what you want, that's our mission. We would say, and I'll defer to Rick as to like what the calendar may look like on the litigation side.
I think it's an issue that we're gonna have to come back to you guys when we have more information available to let you know what the potential resolution of it is. Whether it's just a settlement in a monetary amount that gives us the ability to go out and find another contractor to come in and mediate it, or depending upon what Flint Co. and or its subs would like to do, or what their proposal is, if they believe that they can go in and remediate it to a standard that we think is acceptable. We may have, at some point in time, we may have the option of either one of those, but that's gonna be something I think we're gonna have to discuss as a council.
Do you foresee it dragging out for another 6 months in litigation?
We met with our attorneys late last week about discovery issues, so they've already issued discovery. When this first got started and Catherine gave me access to the files, the documents that we provided to our attorney, I uploaded them to a Dropbox folder. It took 8 hours. So that's how much information there is out there in terms of documents that somebody at Phillips Morrow has gone through. We talked a little bit about, there's only a couple of items that we need to get them. I mean, it's mostly emails, some of the correspondence along those lines. So it'll take that longer and longer. And then the issue with regard to the library, just we're stuck at the point of trying to figure out where to store the books. We thought that the CVS location on Main Street was the best available location because it's already climate controlled. Our staff would have to do a little bit of remediation, really not a lot in terms to get it ready. But for some reason, the library staff doesn't like that place and has proposed a couple of other locations, one of which isn't climate controlled, the other one of which would require significantly more in terms of our staff having to go in and renovate the place to make it ready for books. We've sent them an email, I want to say late last week, essentially asking them, you need to tell us where you want to go.
Is it about access to the books and getting them around town?
Not
or-
really, because it's not going to be open.
Okay.
Wherever the books are stored, not going to be open to the public. The issue on Main Street, based on our conversation, really had to do with, they had concerns about the safety of their employees that would be there. They're going to have like 2 employees there, which I don't really understand. It's on Main Street. It's in a pretty high
Visible.
traffic area.
Intersection.
Yeah, it's not going to be open to the public, so I'm not really understanding what that concern is. But again, we gave them, what we told them was, tell us where you want to go, so we can figure out whether or not we think that's appropriate or not, or make a decision on one or the other. Obviously, as winter comes along and you have more instances of precipitation, that's just going to potentially further damage those books. So we kind of sort of need to get them out there sooner rather than later. And I don't really know what the thought process is from the library's perspective as to.
We may not have a resolution on that even going into the new year.
Resolution, probably not.
Okay.
Now, hopefully we'll have a resolution on the books. We definitely will have a resolution with regard to the litigation by that time.
Okay, I appreciate the updates.
Yeah, I was just curious if we were to upfront the cost of the remediation, where would that money come from?
That's my question to you. It was actually brought up at a finance committee meeting a month or 2 ago about could we tap into the rainy day fund for that? And yes, council could make that determination to do that. There'd be some caveats. Though remember that you have to have drawn down the general fund balance to below 1% of expenditures in order to do that. We have been holding some general fund balance in anticipation of that Griffin and Sutton Park purchase. So would you want to use that money? assuming that you did, also remember that if you appropriate money out of the rainy day fund, you have to repay it within 3 years. So you would hope that if the legal processes are gonna play out, that we're gonna get money back from whoever the other responsible party is, that would need to play out within 3 years. So
It's a big game.
other than that, I don't know. I really don't. I don't, there's not that much money. And again, when I thought the price tag was $100,000 to fix the thing, I was like, okay, we can do this. When I thought it was $500,000, I was like, okay, we can do this. But then when it became like 2 million and then 5 million, we can't do that. I mean, that's a heavy lift.
And so if we spent the money that was intended for Griffin, that means we couldn't spend that money to purchase the Griffin land.
Until we got the money back, yeah.
And the way things, lawsuits go out, the 3-year timeline, the waiting game would just be on at that point, and they would try to just wait us out and beat that clock.
Absolutely.
So that's a risk I'm not necessarily willing to take, and I agree with what Councilmember Grant said. If we step in and we try to fix it, we almost assume the risk and we assume all the damage. And that's hard. It's hard to swallow.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
I agree. I think I've been hesitant to request anything from the general fund surplus. And when people have asked me about it, I've said, well, I've got this Griffin Sutton Wilderness thing and the library situation. So we have a surplus, but we really don't, because we have two big things out there that we don't know how much or when. And I think that point about not only should we get involved or try to fix it, could we even find anybody that would be willing to do it? And how do we even know that they could do it, could fix it?
Better.
I mean, that's the concern too, is like, the court orders Flintco to fix it. They're the ones, if they are the ones allegedly that caused it. And we have to let them fix it. Maybe they're capable, but it's like, it is concerning either way. Can we find someone else that would be willing to do it? And do we want Flintco to be the one that does it? Maybe the court orders that they have to do it, right? But I think, it would be difficult to find someone to do it. I'd be concerned about, do we take on the liability? Does it weaken our legal position against them? And I was wondering though, like, who are the parties to this? Is it City of Norman versus Flintco? Is it Flintco and all subcontractors? Is it include the local company we hired to help oversee it? Is it?
The principal plaintiffs are Flintco, ADG, and the architect.
Okay.
And then Flintco has subs that they can bring in as a third-party plaintiff. But the principal entities, at least with the original suit again, we're the plaintiff, and then you've got Flintco, ADG, and the architect.
Okay. And what sort of do we have in place to keep this from happening again on another building?
We've got new professional staff in-house that's got a much better eye for that type of issue, much better understanding of being able to read a set of commercial drawings and interpret what's happening in the field versus what was intended by the architect. So just the level of professionalism in-house. And actually the group that council authorized us to bring in from Dallas, those envelope consultants that did the initial study and helped highlight those problems, we would probably recommend that entity being on site to oversee any reconstruction.
And when you mentioned the 600,000 or 60,000 per weather event to clean up, so like November had a record amount of rain in Oklahoma this year. Does that mean when it rained every day that week that we were spending 60,000 a day? Or
No,
is it just like a continual?
Yeah, when the sun came back out and we took all the water back out of the building, we were moving 55-gallon trash cans full of water. And just to dry the building out again, it was after the week-long event, so not per day, but per big event.
But if it like rained on Monday and they came in and cleaned it up, and then the following Monday, we had another event. That'd be
We're gonna
another
get a couple
60.
bills, yeah, depending on the volume of rain, and with that one rain event, I think we got 7 inches in a day, versus if it rains a half inch, probably not that big a deal, but.
So we're having to spend $60,000 per weather event, and Oklahoma has a lot of weather events, to clean up a building that we can't use for anything. And we gotta keep it clean, otherwise it'll get worse,
Absolutely.
and cost even more to fix. So we're just like in a, I don't know, a doom loop or something like that. Okay.
So we get those 60K price tags back.
That was, yeah. do
Yeah,
we-
the
are we
meter is
recoup
running, and all of those costs incurred will be included in our final request to the courts.
That's good to know. That was actually one of my questions. But my other concern would be if we do something where we take away from the rainy day fund and it gives us, or it takes away any leverage that we have with timing and the litigation where they can wait us out, potentially for the purchase of that land, that would be terrible in that situation. But that also solves my question of if they do wait us out, if we do give up that leverage, are we still incurring those costs? And if that's gonna be part of the settlement, then makes me feel a little bit better. But that would be my big concern with, as Mayor Heikkila said, the mousetrap of spending one thing and promise of the other, is that would really give a big chunk of what leverage we have away.
We are fortunate in that our accounting staff has successfully navigated us through big events, tornadoes and ice storms, et cetera, where it is a necessity to track costs and centralize them for easy reporting purposes. Typically, we're worried about reporting to FEMA for reimbursement. In this particular instance, it'd be reporting to our legal counsel to take back to the courts to be able to document and demonstrate this is why the number we're asking you for is justified. And we've got good experience in that exercise.
So in the remediation of moving the books to a more suitable facility, will the cost incurred for that be included into the settlement as well?
And the cost to bring all those books back.
I just don't want to get, I mean, if we're asking the Pioneer Library System to pick the site, but it's going to be more of a burden on the voters for what the site is worth, then I would be interested in looking at a cap for that amount or something, or maybe we have to take a firmer position on the site that we pick. With them, definitely don't want to be insensitive to the project, but at the same time, I don't want to put us again in a situation where we've given away leverage.
And it was our recommendation to the Pioneer Library System to file a tort claim against the city. And it's not an adversarial relationship. It provides them a placeholder with their own running clock. And the tally's taken away on expenses they've incurred. So far, knock on wood, their expenses have been relatively minor. Losses inside the facility are ours, furniture, carpeting, fixtures. The book stacks are theirs and so far appear to have been largely salvageable. There was one set of books in the room where the initial mold was identified, and I don't think they were able to save that particular collection. But their claim against the city kind of preserves our ability to make sure that winds up in front of the judge too.
And what we told them was, the difficulty is, in the context of a settlement, we can ask for whatever we want to ask for. And if the other side agrees to pay it, then you get it resolved. The problem for them is, if it doesn't settle and it goes to litigation, I don't think we have standing to request their damages. I mean, they're our tenant. If you think about it, a landlord, as a general rule, if the landlord's building is destroyed, the landlord has his insurance for the building, but the tenant should have their own separate insurance policy with regard to their belongings. So what I was really trying to get across to them is, for you guys to have a seat at the table, you really need to be part of the litigation. They're concerned about optics, and I'm trying to get them to understand, we understand this isn't adversarial between the city and the library system. We understand it's adversarial between the city, the contractor, the architect, and the construction monitor.
Yeah.
But for you guys to make sure that your voice is heard, you really need to have a seat at the table. You really don't need to be sitting behind us relying on us to try to recover your damages, because at some point in time, if it gets litigated, I just don't think we have the ability to do that. So they might sue us, and if they did, it's not really, like I said before, it's not an issue of, we understand, it's just part of you guys making sure that you're adequately covered with regard to this incident. And the only way for you to really do that is to actually have a seat at the table.
Prior to go answer your question, we've got about 20 minutes left in this, and do we, is that more?
We only
time?
have 2 or 3 more
Two more
slides.
slides, okay, I just want to make sure we got your, not rezone, what am I doing? Schedule, yes, sir.
On that note about the legal standing, I guess, how long, I get that part, who's the responsible party. I had it right there, just my mind all of a sudden.
Welcome to 40.
Oh, the insurance part. So City of Norman is self-insured, right? That means everything, including all of our facilities, are self-insured?
Typically, we have a stop loss. We're on the hook for the first. We have a large deductible, could be $500,000 for a facility like that. Our stop loss does not include mold. This isn't an insurable loss. It would be wonderful if it were, but that's why, our first action is to go back against the contractor, especially since we can demonstrate the building leaks since day one, and we were trying to track down little leaks, little did we know. We are in the process. Annually, we renew that stop loss coverage, and we'll be bringing you an agenda item here in the next couple weeks. It's going to cost us a couple extra dollars in coverage for a vacant building. Vacant buildings are more expensive to cover than an occupied building that's got eyeballs on it all the time. So you'll see a cost increase, and it's related to just the types of coverage we're able to get on a vacant building. It has a different level of risk than, City Hall.
So you can get coverage that covers mold, but it costs more.
Mold is tough to find coverage for in any environment. You just, that's why we have Lance on staff with us now, because he's out looking at, air conditioning systems that may be dripping, in insulation for years and years that we would never looked for before, but
Just seem if your building is deemed useless because of a construction
defect.
defect. The mold is a result of a
The
construction.
contractor usually would have
Oh,
insurance
yes,
for
it
that,
is.
but we would not as the building owner.
Okay.
And that actually is the insurance coverage for the coming year is on
It's
your
on
agenda tonight.
So part of the
But
litigation would be their
that's a
insurance.
catastrophic loss. Again, if the building had been wiped out by a tornado, it would be covered. Mold is not though, so that's the good and the bad of it, I guess.
I did have, outside of the library thing, we don't have any capital projects or budgets dedicated to the Rock Creek Entertainment District or the OTA currently. The public safety study, when, are we getting that soon?
Yes, I think it's just a matter of putting it on Brenda's calendar. I think all the work is done, all the review is done, and it's coming to a study session near you.
Then Center City TIF would be Center City TIF funds. Police Department, we've talked in the past about whether to spend money on remodeling or the discussion about building a new one. What do we think? And the discussion being, is it worth to spend a couple $1 million on that existing building, or obviously more than that to build a new one, but that's kind of, part of that study was to find out, I guess, what is the best path to take in that. Is that
Yeah, how functionally obsolete might we be in the existing facility? New facilities for similar uses in a centralized kind of a rollout, you're in the $25 million range. There is thought and conversation about some remodel and or expansion at the NIC, some new additional facility at the EOC with a downtown presence. And that could be a storefront in a parking structure on Gray Street, et cetera. We do know there is commercial interest in the footprint that the current PD sits on. And I think that's, what a wonderful thing to be able to discuss. that it's not worth 25 million, but it could be worth enough to get the ball rolling. And, you know, it's all about council's priorities when it comes to that capital budget. And some projects take several years of funding to wind up building. Could be a geo bond question. It could be a public safety sales tax, you know, PAYGO element at some point in the future too.
Probably if we were gonna do a new police department, a geo bond, like you mentioned, maybe those new fire stations on there. Still have to think about how we'd fund staffing for them, I guess. But that's just something that's been a conversation with council before about how much money to dedicate to the current building, but also knowing that building a new one could take 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they gotta work out of that one until then. So.
And you know, we've seen it time and time again. Projects become real when council makes them a priority. And over time, if money is the only obstacle, that's okay. Money has ways of presenting itself, just like lo and behold, ARPA money shows up and we're able to build the EOC that was necessary. We had a $8 million hole in that budget when we started. We had zero budget for senior wellness, and now we've got a fantastic building. So don't let that fear of we don't know how we're going to fund it prevent it from becoming a priority. That's just something we would work to over time.
And then the fleet stuff, I remember the presentation you gave, or the staff gave, I don't know, a year and a half ago, that the whole North Base area master plan and fleet facilities, and it was 200 million to do it all, and then 2 years later it was 400, and then 600, and up to $1 billion at 10 years out to do all of it. It was the estimate. So keeping that in mind too, since those are the kind of stuff that keeps the city actually running.
We'll eat that elephant one bite at a time if necessary. Our appetite is into perpetuity, fortunately.
I mean, this last slide is just to open the conversation, since we're starting the FYE 2026 process, for you all to talk about any priorities you might have for this upcoming year, any project requests, questions. The earlier we get those in the process, give staff time to get some good cost estimates for that budget process for you all to think about as we move on. So if you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I know staff is, or I believe staff is applying for some grants on this topic, but a overhaul to the zoning ordinance, I think, is a huge priority of the upcoming year, just as we try to get our new comp plan adopted. It's my understanding there's a lot of conflicts in the comp plan that if we don't address the zoning ordinance, they're just going to be in conflict with each other for a long time. So I don't know that we put it on the budget list priorities, but it's certainly a priority of mine.
Yes, sir.
Same here, but yeah, what you said, we have no money to add any projects or anything to it, so
I said if you add something, you
we
gotta
need to
take
take it away. Where is the list for the current, if we wanted to remove something, where is that?
On the current project list, not yet.
Okay.
Contract awarded.
So if we wanted to, like, if council wanted to look at the current list and say, yeah, we'd rather not do that one because we want to add this new one.
You might, where you saw those guidelines, 25% for street maintenance, you might say, let's cut that back to 15% this year, that sort of thing.
So not any specific
Not a specific
projects, just the percent of the budget for the overall. Okay. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely things I'd like to do, but it looks like this year isn't the year to do it. But if council members or as a whole want to, we could, if we wanted to fund the zoning overhaul with the general fund, we could. Or if we had, a sidewalk thing we wanted to, we could propose that.
And maybe I have to acknowledge my own ignorance about this, but I'm gonna address this to Jane, because I don't understand the cost involved in changing. I thought that was just like an ordinance that staff would prepare, the council would adopt, and I don't understand what the cost.
That is the execution. It's more in kind to when the city clerk recodifies the municipal code and looks for continuity in language from start to finish. Same thing in the zoning ordinance. We have to make sure we're gonna change the land uses, that we didn't all of a sudden create land that has a land use with an incongruent zone on top of it. So it's really a comprehensive review of the entire zoning ordinance all at once. The adoption process is simply that. Here's a new zoning ordinance for
And you
council
have to
to
hire a
adopt.
consultant to do that, to know.
Lots of eyeballs,
It'll be
lots of
similar to the
eyeballs.
engineering design criteria.
And it was first created in the fifties, right?
Yes.
It has been overhauled in 7 years.
Amended
Been a
probably a
little
million times.
But just as a reminder, the discussion has been, it's not just the zoning code, it's the subdivision regulations that would be included in this.
And the housing study. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say to piggyback, agreed on funding for the zoning overhauls to make everything copacetic. And if we don't get that grant, I would probably think about general fund funds or whatever is available, or pursuing another grant, whatever we can get a hold of.
We appreciate the magnitude of truly a comprehensive approach. And this is the next logical step in the comprehensive overhaul to the land use plan is how do we get to congruency as quickly as possible? So we can bring you that as a priority and show you how we'll get it paid for.
And one of the limitations to that is, if you remember from Finance Committee, our revenues are flat to basically a little bit negative. So there's not a lot in general fund, I don't think, that we can take out of there with any surety that we can pay the bills all the time. It won't crash us, but
Hopefully we get selected for that grant.
that would be
It's
wonderful.
the challenge we live for.
Anything else from council? All right, we are adjourned until 6:30. Thank you.
Appreciate you. If I'm